There's a lot of ways to create a cool side panel like this in DaVinci Resolve, like using the Fusion page, using a bunch of adjustment layers and stuff on the edit page, but none of them are going to be as easy to use or look as good as this tool I want to show you today. That tool, of course, is WippPanel from the EditorCollection. EditorCollection is a set of just time-saving edit page tools that do stuff like zoom animations, animations, and creating cool panels like this. I'll talk a bit more about the entire collection at the end, but for right now, I want to show you what WippPanel is and show you how to use it. So right here, I just have one of my talking head videos, and I want to add some information to the screen. So with WippPanel, it's extremely easy. I don't need a bunch of different layers. I don't need to hop into Fusion. All I have to do is come up to Effects, come over to Generators, grab WippPanel, and then drop this on top of my clip. Now, this has a ton of options. You see it has some text built right in. We can actually stack stuff on top of it on the edit page timeline and have it follow the motion. So we're going to talk about all that, but for right now, let's look at just the settings inside of WippPanel. If these aren't showing up, just make sure that you click on the clip itself, and then those will open in the inspector. So the first thing we can do is put this on any side of the screen. If I want this to be on the right side, I can just press right. And the cool thing is it's automatically going to reframe my video, so if I go all the way back to the beginning, the panel's going to animate on and it's going to push the video off to the side, so that way, like me talking, I'll stay in the center of the screen the entire time. Once you set the location, you can choose how much of the screen you want the panel to take up. So an overlap of 0.5 is going to be 50% of the screen. Now the fun stuff is all inside of the panel content, which lets us customize what the panel is actually going to display. And the first thing we have is this layers option, so we can choose what the panel is actually going to contain inside of it. And the first one in there is none. This is nice if you want to stack stuff on top of it, like put a video inside of here. Again, we'll talk about that in just a second, but a lot of the times you'll use the text option. And the text option has all of these different tabs with the different items that we can toggle on and off. So if I don't want a heading, I can turn that off. If I don't want the dividing line, I can turn that off right there. So all of these have a bunch of different customization, and they all do have text wrapping as well that is based on how big the panel is. So if I take the overlap and bring this down, you can see that text is going to, break into new lines, so that way it is all visible. And something you want to know about is this text width slider down here, and this is going to be the same across all of the different text sources. And if I bring this down, what you can see is it's going to add in some padding to both sides of the screen, so that way it starts clipping the text in a little bit easier. If I set this to 1, it's not going to have any clipping, so then the text is going to come all the way up to the edge of the panel. So normally I like to leave this at like 0.9, and that gives it some nice padding while still leaving plenty of room for the text. When you're doing stuff, you might have like a list inside of WippPanel. Right down here we have all of these anchor controls, so I can anchor this to the left side so that way all of the bullet points are lined up correctly, and then you can just take the center X and Y and shift this over so that way it's showing up more in the center of the image. When you do this, if I were to go through and maybe add in a bunch more lines, you might notice that it's no longer centered vertically. So you could, of course, come through and move all of these individually, like shift the list up, shift the divider up, shift the text up, but you don't want to do that. That's just a lot of work. So all the way down here, we have a shift all, which will move all of it. And to make it even easier, there's a center text button. So if you press center text, it's going to automatically figure out what that needs to be, so that way everything is perfectly in the center. All right, and the last thing that I want to talk about when we're just looking at the text is this animation parallax. So if I play this, you can see that the text is not going to be moving at the same speed as the panel. It's going to be moving at about half the speed. If I turn this off, what's going to happen is the text will move, it'll be locked onto the panel and just completely slide with that. So if you want some parallax, you can keep that on. If you don't want it, you can take that off. But under the layers, we also have an image in Fusion option. So if we do image, what'll happen is it usually goes to media offline, and we want to come down to the image controls, and we need to tell it which image to look at. So going over to the media pool, I just have this EditorCollection pack image, and if I grab this and drag it over and drop it right in the clip name, I might have to move the playhead back and forth just to update it, but as you can see, it's going to be putting that right inside of the panel. And I want to reset the shift all, but then I have all of these settings here so I can zoom it in, I can zoom it out, I can rotate it, I can move it around, all of that. Well, the cool thing about this is I can come up to the layers and I can combine this with a text. So if I do text plus image, maybe what I want to do is remove the padding and then remove the paragraph, remove the divider, and then in here I can just type in EditorCollection, and then I'll just shift both of these around so that way I can have some text like a label, and then I can have the pack itself, and all of that's going to update on the animations. Now the last option is Fusion, and what that allows you to do is switch over into the Fusion page, and then you can plug anything you want right into here. So if I plug some text in here and then just type something in that, it shows up in the panel, it's going to move with the panel. So if you want to build some fancy animations and fancy graphics, you can do all of that. plug it into that input, and then it's gonna work. Let's switch this back to be the text option, and then I'm gonna turn on the paragraph and divider, and then we just wanna reset all of this so that way it looks a little bit more normal. All right, below the panel content, we have the panel style. So right here, we can change the color of the panel itself, as well as add in a border. I'm gonna make that a little bit darker. So we can add in a border, we can change its width right here, as well as its color down here. And with any of the color things, if you press this little drop down arrow, you can get the full color picker instead of just having these different sliders. All right, next up is the drop shadow. So we can do an outer shadow or an inner shadow. So the outer shadow is on by default. That's what's gonna be cast onto our image itself. And I'm gonna turn off the border just so we can see this a bit better. And then we also have the inner shadow, which is gonna cast onto the panel. So normally I would only have one of these on, so maybe I'd turn off the outer shadow, and then for the inner shadow, maybe we set this to be like a white color, or maybe we make it a little bit warmer just to match with the image. But if we play around with these settings, you can see we can cast a color inside of the panel, and again, all of that updates with the animations. Below the drop shadows, we have the reframe option, so this is going to change where our background media goes. So I can take the center, I can shift this back and forth to add in some more offset. If I want, I can turn off auto reframe, which means that it's not going to reframe it at all. When auto reframe is off, I can still move the center X and Y position to just, do it completely manually, whatever I want. And I can even zoom into this and have all of that update. Most of the time, my workflow for this is leaving auto reframe on and then just shifting the center X back and forth just a little bit if needed to make sure that I remain centered. Below that is the AnimEngine. Now, AnimEngine is one of the coolest parts about all these tools. It's a system that handles all of the animation, so that way you don't need to worry about keyframes or making it smooth, any of that. So when I press play, it's going to take 1 second to animate on, and since animate out is on, it's also going to take 1 second to animate off. If I want, I could turn off animate out, so it's not going to animate out anymore. I could set this to be 2 seconds, so it's a little bit smoother of an animation as it comes on. I tend to like a 2-second animation for the panel effects. I can also just drag this out and make it longer, and it's going to automatically update those animations to fit. And if I really want to get fancy, I can uncheck this mirror option, so that way the out animation can be a different length from the in animation. Now this also does have the offset, which just makes it so that the animation won't start, say, until right here. But for generator clips, you don't really want to do that because you can just shift the clip back and forth, you can just trim the end and whatnot. Those are really applicable on the effect version of the clips, but this one's a generator, so you don't need to worry about that. Now below that, we have the different easing options. So we can set this to be linear if we don't want any easing. We can set this to be easing if we want just these default easing curves, which look really good and work most of the time. And we can also set this to be custom if we want to draw our own easing curve. Now that's a little bit tricky and a little bit hard to do, so normally just leave it to be easing and then play around with these different curve options. Then of course the last thing we have on here is motion blur. Now motion blur is going to slow the tool down quite a bit, but the nice thing about it is it only renders motion blur while the tool is actually animating. So if I make this panel 30 seconds long and it only has a 2-second animation at the beginning and end, it only needs to render motion blur for those 4 seconds, and the middle spot is going to render no problem. All right, I'm going to delete that, add this in again, and you can actually do that by doing shift space, typing WippPanel, and then you want to grab the green version. So the green is the generator. And I want to talk about adding in, videos and images on top of this clip in the timeline and getting it to follow with the clip. So we saw that you could just come to the panel content and set this to be image and load in an image. That works great, but if you want to do a video, I wouldn't do this method because you can't, reposition the video, trim it up, or do anything like that. So what I would do is set this to be none, so that way we have nothing in the panel. And what we want to do is press this copy settings button. That's going to pull in the location, it's going to pull in the overlap, all of that stuff. So if I press copy settings, we can then grab something like the EditorCollection image, drop this above the panel, and we want to make sure that this is the same length. And if I do shift space with this selected, with panel, what I can do is grab the content effect. When I press enter, in the inspector, all we need to do is press this paste settings. And now this logo or this image is going to follow inside of that panel, and as you can see, it's going to have the animation parallax and all that cool stuff. I also added some transform controls, so we can scale this down, we can move it down. So if I wanted to, I could come back into the panel and add in some text and then turn off the divider and the paragraph, and label it and combine these two options. But the cool thing about this is you can build your entire own graphic up top here. You can animate this stuff, and then that way it stays within the panel. Now, if you do want to animate stuff and move it around, or maybe have it so this EditorCollection image doesn't stay on the panel the entire time, you could of course trim this out. The issue with that is that it's going to try and animate off at the end. So what I did is I added in these 2 checkboxes. So if you do this, if the end of the clip is not touching the end of the panel, you just want to turn off anim out. So that way when I press play, it'll animate in just fine, and then it'll just disappear on its own. And you could use something like WippAnimate to animate it out in some different way. Now, people ask about this all the time, adding in some sort of list to the panel. So I want to take a look at using my WippList tool, which is one of the titles in EditorCollection, to add in some list content to there. So if I were to add in WippList, we could customize this, do whatever. But with the same thing, we can add in the WippPanel content to this title. When I do that, I still have it all copied, so I'm just gonna press paste settings, and you can see the list is now gonna show up inside of the panel. Now, when you're stacking this is 3 fusion effects going on, and the list is a big tool, the panel is a big tool, so you might start running into some performance issues if you try and stack this too much. But this way I could come up to the video, so that way I can get to WippList, come down to the AnimEngine, and then I could have it when the panel, starts coming out. I could start the animation here, and in that case, I'd want to turn off the mirror out, so that way that doesn't have the same offset. But that way the panel animates out and then the list animates on. And then I'm actually just gonna turn off animate out completely, so that way the list goes with the panel off the screen. Now, when you're doing this, if you're having trouble rendering it, what I recommend is selecting all of the clips that you have, right-clicking, coming to render in place, and then setting this to be QuickTime and then DNxHR. So DNxHR will allow an alpha channel, so that way, you can see behind the list, you can see the panel, you can see the video, and that way it's gonna render it out as just a video, so that way it plays back no problem. And that's how you can use WippPanel from the EditorCollection. As you can see, this is a really cool tool, and there's a ton of tools just like this in the pack. WippList is one of them. There's a full animation tool called WippAnimate, and all of them are powered by the AnimEngine, so you'd never have to worry about keyframes, and you can customize it pretty much as much as you'd like. So if you don't have it yet, do yourself a favor, pick it up, and save yourself hours when editing. If you guys have any questions about WippPanel, just let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.